Hello, my name is Jessica Klimish. I'm a creative writer, writing coach, and editor. And a few weeks ago, or a month or so ago, I had asked my readers on Substack what writing questions they had. Some of them put down their questions, and so today I am answering those questions. So, without further ado, the first question I'm going to answer is, how do you let go as a writer and not drive yourself mad with what ifs and anxiety over what you submit for publication? If you read my Substack or if you saw my YouTube video about rejection, you know that I embrace rejection as a writer. There's a reason why common wisdom tells writers to aim for 100 rejections per year. But before I got to the point where I could embrace rejections as a writer, I experienced a lot of anxiety every time I submitted something. And I think that seems to be what kind of this question is aiming at or looking for. So there's a few things to keep in mind in looking at these what ifs and anxiety about submitting your work. One is that editors are human, and most of them are also writers. They're familiar with the process, they understand the anxiety, and so there is a level of empathy, I believe. And so that's something to keep in mind. You're really all on the same playing field. It's not an editor here and a writer here. The other thing to keep in mind is that a rejection does not mean that your work is not publishable. And whatever you do, keep writing and keep working on your craft. I know that once I started to get publications, then a lot of my anxiety about submitting really kind of went away. And then, especially if I have multiple pieces out for submission at a time, I tend to not even think about it anymore. Where it used to be, I'd be checking, am I going to hear back from this place? When am I going to hear back from this place? So that's another aspect to keep in mind in regard to this what ifs and anxiety. There's also this idea of trust. Trust the editors that you send your work to. You know, if they send you a positive rejection, trust that. Trust that it is positive. They liked your work. There's so many reasons why they might have rejected it. Also, trust in the fact that if you get an acceptance, trust that it's because they like your work. And if some of the anxiety is because you don't think your work is good enough, trust that the editor will address that, especially if they accept the work. Maybe they'll ask you to do some edits or something like that. Worst case scenario, if you submit something and decide that you don't think it's good enough for wherever you submitted, you can withdraw it. I've done that. I hope that helps as far as the anxiety around submission, but hopefully this answers the question. Okay, so let's look at the next question. Are you using AI at all in your submission process, either finding places to submit or pitch, or for writing queries, emails, etc.? This is an interesting question, very timely. A very short answer is no. I do not use AI for any writing or editing that I do, and I do not use it in the submission process as far as looking for places to submit to. And I'll tell you why. There's lots of reasons why, actually. But specifically, submitting is kind of an art form, I would say. It's more of an art than a science, maybe. There's no right or wrong answers. The thing is that where you submit is based on your goals as a writer. It's very personalized, it's very individual. Nobody can tell me where to submit. People can make suggestions, but then I have to look at the journal and say, okay, this is going to fit my needs or it's not going to suit my work. I guess my point is that submitting is a very personal decision in a way. At least that's how I look at it, because I think it's part of the process, the writing process, and it's a part of the writing process that I personally enjoy in that, not that it's fun. I mean, maybe sometimes it is. You have to do it. It's part of the writing process. Although this was not really part of the question, I will also acknowledge the fact that most, but not all, literary journals do not accept work that uses AI or utilizes AI in any way. So that's something to keep in mind. And as far as writing emails or queries, again, I want to address the idea of personalization. When you submit to a journal, it's usually 2-sentence cover letter. I mean, you don't need AI for that. But the other aspect of that is, from what I've seen, AI cannot personalize things. So I've received messages from people that clearly use AI. The writing is stilted, impersonal, distant, and that's a tip-off to me that this person may have used AI. And it's a turnoff, really. As an editor, of course, I will reply to emails regardless, but if I suspect that they've utilized AI in some way, I'm probably not going to take that writer as seriously as a more personalized note or email, someone who has obviously taken the time to do the work. So my long and short answer is, if you're a serious writer, do the work yourself. It's why I don't use AI for any of my writing related activities. Next question, favorite prompt. So I love prompts, but I especially love prompts that ask me to kind of look at odd or weird things that really challenge my idea of reality, maybe. I love prompts that will help me look from different perspectives. I also love prompts that can be used over and over again. I mean, you can get a different story every time you use the prompt. So a recent prompt that I came up with after talking to a friend was something to the effect of, write a story in which the character claims to have learned everything they need to know about some field of study or the world or anything by some unusual source, like somebody who claims to have learned everything they need to know about physics from drinking orange juice or something crazy like that. And instead of going a more sentimental route like Robert Fulghum's Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, the point of this particular prompt is to really lean into the absurd and the odd. But prompts can literally come from anywhere. Sometimes I get prompts from, if I overhear people talking and I'm like, that's an interesting thing. Let me continue this conversation in my own fictional world. And I also love prompts that sort of make me question things like how or why or what if. So for example, if I see a tennis shoe up in a tree, which I've occasionally seen, it makes me wonder. And so I want to ask, how did it get there and why is it there? And you can create so many different scenarios from this. For example, what if a little kid went up a tree to eat candy that he wasn't supposed to eat, and then he was abducted by aliens and his shoe was left behind in the tree? You can go all sorts of crazy directions with prompts. Even general prompts like, write about a kid who has a bad first day of school, which is really general, but as the writer you can go deeper, for example, and be more specific. For example, maybe the kid has a really bad day at school because they get abducted by aliens. See, there's a story now. So anyway, I like prompts that really can take me odd places. So my favorite prompts are really any that kind of take me in these directions where I can go really strange with it. All right, next question. This is kind of a question comment. How do we, as writers, stop enabling or work around biases in the publishing and editorial realms that center on voices that conform to conventional, cishet, white, educated, etc. standards? I know this has gotten better and that there are many publications that seek out and support marginalized writers, but I think there is still a long way to go. And I can imagine that editors bring their own biases, whether conscious or not. So yes, creative writing is, of course, highly subjective, and everybody is going to have their own biases. So from where I sit, and this is based on having taught at a university and having attended many different conferences for English teachers, conferences for writers, for editors, creatives, all these different things, there is definitely, from what I've seen, there is definitely people out there trying to bring light to marginalized voices. At the last editing conference I went to, it was very obvious that they were trying to bring in diverse perspectives, and there was a lot of talk about inclusivity and language and how to acknowledge different biases in writing and different things like that. So it's definitely being addressed. And yes, there's definitely more work that can be done, because as we see often, it's the negative voices that sometimes are the loudest, the voices of hate, or the voices that are overbearing. You know, they tend to be louder than the voices that are trying to be raised up. So it's out there, but yeah, they tend to get drowned out. But there is good news, I would say, because a lot of journals really try to reach out, and I'm talking about like literary journals, they really try to reach out to marginalized writers. There's often, if there's a submission fee to a journal, it's often waived for marginalized writers, because they're trying to encourage diversity in their literary journals. So of course, there's a lot more we could do. So a couple of other things I want to say about this is, because the question seems to be asking what we can do as writers. And one thing we can do, or try to do, is as much as it's safe to do, I know it's not for everybody, is to use our voices, to speak out. If you look back historically, it's often the writers who have been the impetus to social change, sometimes at their own peril. So there's that idea of using your voices. We live in a time where we have access to so much information, and we have ways to get our own information and our words out. You know, LinkedIn, Substack, Blue Sky, all these different social media platforms. So we can use that to our advantage as much as possible. So that's an option too, what we can do as writers. Something else we can do is start our own literary journals or magazines or platform. But there's different things you can do. You can partner with a bookstore, or you can have like an open mic night for certain marginalized identities, or something like that, where you have a chance to really spotlight different voices. So if something's missing, sometimes that's what you need to do, is figure out how you can start something and bring it to light. It can be easier said than done. And again, I know it can be a lot of work. But that is an option. There's different ways we can use our voices and organize. Okay, so this looks like the last question. This question is, I always love hearing about people's writing routines or rhythms, even if I have no intention of adopting them. What is yours? I like this question. This is a fun question. One thing that's kind of fun about this question is because my writing routine has changed a lot over the last 25 years. And when I was thinking about this, it's not that I'm writing more. I've always written a lot. I always spent a lot of time on my writing, but something changed when I went from being a hobby writer to a serious writer. And the main thing that changed was my goals. When I was merely writing as a hobby, which is perfectly fine, but when I was doing that, my goals were very vague. So I was writing as much as I write now, but nothing was really happening for me because I was just writing. I didn't have any specific goals for why I was writing. So I don't actually write anymore now, even though it might look like it, because in the past 5 years I've had like 100 stories published, where the 20 years before that I had like 2. And so, and again, I'm not writing any more than I was then. It's the way I've approached writing. So my approach to writing has changed as I transitioned from a hobby writer to a more serious writer. So I don't write every day. I write regularly, but I don't hold myself to any specific word counts or tell myself I have to write for X amount of time each day, because it isn't realistic. It isn't realistic for me. It may be for some writers. I do try to do writing related things each day. So either reading, generating new work, revising, or submitting. I try to do at least one of those things for a few minutes each day. It doesn't always happen, but that's what I try to do. So my routine is really kind of sporadic. Like I work a lot in spurts, like 10 minutes here, half hour here, depending on what I'm working on. Longer manuscripts, I usually need to take a little bit more time at once. But since what I write is very short, it's easy for me to spend like 5 minutes here editing and 10 minutes here tweaking a few sentences and going on like that. And I host a Monday night write night. It's a virtual write night. And so there's a 2-hour time slot that I do have set aside for writing each week. And so that's really the only set time that I have for writing. And anybody's welcome to join the virtual write night. I'll put a link in the comments. But right now, the main thing motivating me in my writing is my goals. So what I work on, what I revise, anything that I decide to do with my writing is all based on what my specific goals are. And as I mentioned earlier, it's this idea of what my specific goals are is what has really changed my routine. Because when my writing goals were vague, I spent pretty much the same amount of time on writing, but I wasn't being as productive. If you need help setting writing goals, as a writing coach, I can help with that. Go to my website, jessicaclimish.com, for more information, or leave a comment. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope I've answered these questions that people submitted as best I could. And again, as usual, please share, comment, like, subscribe to my channel, and I hope I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.